Sometimes it only takes a single sentence to reveal everything. He thought he was clever, rehearsed, calm, and in control. The kind of man who could charm his way out of any situation just like he always had. For years, that smile of his had opened doors, closed deals, and buried truths. But when he stepped into this courtroom, he made one mistake, one tiny, careless slip. And in front of an experienced female judge with silver hair, sharp eyes, and decades of intuition sharper than any lawyer's tongue, that one word was all it took. At first, it was almost imperceptible. A pause, a twitch, a glance to the side. The kind of flicker only someone who has seen 1,000 liars before would catch. The courtroom went still. The judge's pen stopped moving. Then, she leaned forward ever so slightly and said in that calm, surgical tone that could slice a man's ego in half, "Sir, you're lying." His smirk vanished. The mask cracked. And just like that, the game was over. What followed wasn't just a cross-examination, it was a demolition. Every word he'd rehearsed became evidence against him, every excuse another rope around his credibility. Because when truth walks into the room, lies don't stand a chance. And by the time she was finished, he wasn't just exposed. He was undone. But what exactly did he say that gave him away? That's the part you won't want to miss. The man standing at the plaintiff's podium wore a smirk that had been practiced for years, a smile honed in boardrooms, social events, and endless nights of pretending to be the smartest man in every room. His name was Ethan Caldwell, a self-proclaimed consultant who specialized in making things happen. What that actually meant depended on who you asked. To his clients, he was the guy who could fix problems. To his colleagues, he was slippery, charming, but never accountable. And to the people he left behind, he was nothing short of a walking red flag. The fluorescent courtroom lights reflected off his expensive watch, the kind that screamed wealth even when paired with cheap intentions. He straightened his tie, exhaled sharply, and muttered under his breath, "Let's get this over with." Across the aisle stood Mara Torres, the defendant, a small business owner who had once believed every word Ethan said. She clutched a worn folder of documents to her chest, the corners bent and marked with highlighter. Her eyes didn't carry the confidence of someone ready for a fight. They carried the exhaustion of someone who'd already fought too many. And presiding over them both, calm and commanding, was the experienced female judge. Silver hair pulled into a neat bun, black robe pressed to perfection, gaze steady as a surgeon's hand. Her reputation preceded her. Everyone in that courtroom knew that under her sharp logic, lies didn't survive long. Her name, Judge Helen Briggs. "All right," Judge Briggs began, tapping her pen lightly against the desk. "Let's hear it from the top. Mr. Caldwell, you're the plaintiff. Tell me, in your own words, why we're here today." Ethan flashed his smile, the one that usually worked. "Of course, Your Honor, it's really quite simple. I loaned Ms. Torres here $5,000 last year to help her expand her cleaning business. I believed in her. I wanted to support her. But when the time came for her to pay me back, she refused. She stopped answering my calls, dodged my messages, and left me no choice but to take legal action." He paused for dramatic effect, scanning the room like an actor waiting for applause. "I'm just here to get what's rightfully mine." Judge Briggs tilted her head slightly, unimpressed. "And Ms. Torres, what's your response?" Mara took a shaky breath. "Your Honor, that's not true. He didn't loan me money. He invested in my business. He said he wanted to be a silent partner, help me grow. We even had a written agreement. At least I thought we did. But after I started making progress, he changed everything. He wanted control, wanted to change prices, hire people I didn't know. When I said no, he demanded all his money back." Ethan chuckled, a smug, condescending sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "An investment, really? That's creative. She begged me for help, Your Honor. She was drowning." Judge Briggs held up a hand, silencing him. "You'll get your turn. For now, let her finish." Mara's voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. "He said he believed in me. I trusted him. I let him into my business, and he took advantage of that. When I refused to hand everything over, he made up this loan story." The judge leaned back, studying Ethan. "Do you have documentation of this alleged loan?" "Of course," he said smoothly, reaching into a folder and pulling out a single sheet of paper. "Right here." She adjusted her glasses and examined the document carefully. It was a typed agreement, neat, professional, but oddly vague. No business headers, no notarization, no signatures beyond the 2 names at the bottom. Where was this document signed? She asked. Ethan smiled confidently. At her shop. I drafted it myself to make things easier. Mara's eyebrows furrowed. That's not the paper I signed. The one I signed had different terms? Ethan's grin faltered for just a moment. A flicker. A tiny crack. Judge Briggs noticed. She turned to him slowly. Different terms? Mr. Caldwell, did you alter this document after it was signed? He blinked a fraction of a second too long. Of course not. I made minor adjustments for clarity, but the intent was always the same. Minor adjustments, the judge repeated, her tone cool. Did she sign this version? He shifted in place. Well, not exactly this version. But there it was, that slip. That moment when a liar forgets to breathe between the truth and the story. Judge Briggs leaned forward, voice quiet but cutting. Sir, you're lying. The air in the courtroom froze. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to stop. Ethan's jaw tensed, the smile gone now, replaced with a nervous half-grin. Excuse me? You said she signed this document, the judge said, tapping it once. Now you admit she didn't sign this version. That's not a minor adjustment. That's misrepresentation. He opened his mouth to protest, but she didn't give him the chance. Mr. Caldwell, I've been doing this a long time. And one thing I've learned is that when people start editing documents after the fact, it's never about clarity. It's about control. You wanted to rewrite the story to fit your narrative, the courtroom murmured. Mara lowered her head, fighting back tears, not of sadness, but relief. Someone had finally seen it. Ethan tried to recover. Your Honor, with all due respect, I'm just trying to... Respect is earned, Judge Briggs interrupted, her tone still calm, still surgical. And so far you've earned none. The rest of the testimony unraveled like thread from a cheap suit. Every time Ethan spoke, his story shifted slightly, details rearranged, numbers adjusted, dates blurred. Each time the judge pressed with quiet precision. When exactly did she ask for this money? What was it used for? Show me proof of the transfer. Where's the receipt for this loan you claim? His answers came slower each time, his confidence leaking out like air from a punctured tire. By the 20th minute, the room no longer saw a confident businessman. They saw a man cornered by his own arrogance. Mara's side of the story was simple, consistent and documented. She showed screenshots of text messages where Ethan had written, "We'll make a great team. You handle operations, I'll invest and stay out of the day-to-day." She showed bank statements with the exact transfer labeled as investment capital, not a personal loan. She showed her business plan where his name was listed as a silent partner. Judge Briggs scanned the evidence slowly, expression unreadable. Then she looked up. Mr. Caldwell, would you like to explain why your supposed loan was described as an investment in your own messages? Ethan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. That was just phrasing. I meant loan in the broader sense. In the broader sense, she repeated. Interesting choice of words. Mara's attorney, a quiet man who had said very little until now, leaned forward. Your Honor, my client's business suffered for months because of his interference. He tried to control her vendors, changed her pricing model without authorization, and when she pushed back, he weaponized this document to claim ownership. The judge nodded, taking notes. Sounds like something more than a loan to me. Ethan's mask began to slip further. His shoulders slumped, his voice lost its charm. He wasn't performing anymore. He was defending. Look, I was just trying to help her, he said, tone softening, trying to pivot to sympathy. She was struggling. I gave her money, I gave her advice. And this is how she repays me? By painting me as some villain? Judge Briggs's pen stopped moving. She looked up straight into his eyes. Mr. Caldwell, she said evenly, you weren't helping her. You were controlling her. And when she stopped letting you, you rewrote the story. The words landed heavy. The gallery went silent again. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Ethan Caldwell looked small. The judge glanced toward the clock, then folded her hands. Here's what I see so far, she said, voice steady. You entered into an agreement with Ms. Torres under the pretense of partnership. When she refused to let you dominate her business, you changed the terms after the fact and attempted to recast yourself as a creditor rather than a partner. That's deceitful, and frankly, it undermines your entire claim. Ethan clenched his jaw, muttering under his breath. You're twisting my words. The judge heard it. Of course she did. Her gaze sharpened, cool as ice. I don't twist words, Mr. Caldwell. I listen carefully. You should try it sometime. The gallery chuckled softly, a ripple of restrained laughter that made Ethan's face redden. As the hearing drew to a close for the day, Judge Briggs made one final remark before adjourning. I'll review the remaining evidence before issuing my decision. But let me make one thing clear, she said, her tone lowering slightly. Honesty in this courtroom isn't optional. You can polish your words all you like, but truth doesn't need polish. It stands on its own. She turned to Mara. Bring your original signed copy of the agreement tomorrow morning. Then, looking back to Ethan, and you, Mr. Caldwell, bring every draft version of that document you claim existed. Everyone. He nodded stiffly, but inside, panic was beginning to boil. He knew what those documents contained. And worse, he knew she'd see right through them. Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting over the city skyline, that golden, cinematic glow that made everything look softer than it was. Mara stood on the steps, the exhaustion finally catching up to her. Her attorney joined her quietly. You did great in there, she shook her head. I just told the truth. That's what wins, he said, glancing back toward the doors, especially in front of a judge like her. Inside, Ethan lingered in the empty courtroom, watching as Judge Briggs reviewed her notes. For the first time in his career of manipulation and half-truths, he couldn't read the person in front of him. He had always relied on charm to fill the gaps between his lies. But charm had an expiration date, and it had just run out. When she finally looked up, she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her expression said everything. Tomorrow was going to be long, and for Ethan Caldwell, it would be the longest day of his life. The next morning arrived like a storm that hadn't decided whether it wanted to roar or simmer. The courthouse buzzed quietly, footsteps echoing in tiled hallways, papers shuffling, whispers passing from one bench to another. Ethan Caldwell walked in with the look of a man determined to reclaim control. He wore a navy suit pressed within an inch of its life and carried a sleek leather briefcase that practically screamed authority. But beneath the polished surface was something brittle, the thin veneer of someone who'd spent the night rehearsing lies and pretending they'd sound like truth. Mara Torres, on the other hand, entered without fanfare. Her clothes were simple. Her posture wasn't one of victory or vengeance. It was quiet resolve. She wasn't there to win a performance, she was there to end one. The courtroom settled as Judge Helen Briggs, the experienced female judge, took her seat. Her silver hair glowed softly under the overhead lights, her black robe immaculate, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her tone was steady, measured, and sharp enough to slice through pretense. Let's resume the matter of Caldwell versus Torres. Ethan smiled faintly. But his confidence faltered when the judge's eyes flicked toward him with pinpoint precision, like she was reading the invisible words hovering above his head. I'm hiding something, Mr. Caldwell, she began. You were instructed to bring every version of the contract in question. Did you? Yes, Your Honor. He placed a neat stack of papers on the podium, each page encased in plastic sleeves as though they were relics of importance. Good. Hand them to my clerk. He did. His movements too careful, the way a man handles evidence he knows can betray him. The clerk brought them to Judge Briggs, who examined the pages one by one. As she flipped through them, her brows drew closer together. Interesting, she murmured. She set one document beside another, tracing the lines with her pen. The first version reads, Investment Partnership to Fund Business Growth. The later version reads, Loan for Business Expansion, repayable within 12 months. She looked up. That's not a small adjustment, Mr. Caldwell. That's an entirely different agreement. Ethan's tongue darted over his lips. It was a clarification, Your Honor. The original wording was confusing. Mara's voice was calm but firm. It wasn't confusing when I signed it. The judge's gaze shifted between them. Ms. Torres, do you have your copy? Yes. She handed over a creased, coffee-stained document, the kind that looked lived in. Real. When the judge held it up beside Ethan's revised version, the difference was glaring. Not just in content, but in intention. Mr. Caldwell, the judge said quietly, you typed both of these documents? Yes, Your Honor. Did you send the second one to Ms. Torres for her signature? He hesitated. No, but did she ever agree to the second version in writing? He cleared his throat. Not in writing, no. But she verbally agreed. We had a conversation about it. The judge leaned back, pen tapping the table softly. And when exactly did this conversation take place? He opened his mouth, searching for the right date. But the truth didn't exist, and his brain knew it. Late June, I think. Mara interjected gently. Your Honor, I was out of state in late June. My mother was hospitalized in Nevada. I have the hospital documents to prove it. Judge Briggs turned her head slowly toward Ethan. Her tone dropped. Quiet. Deliberate. Mr. Caldwell, we appear to have a problem. The gallery went silent again. Even the air conditioner's hum seemed to fade into the tension. Ethan tried to regroup. Your Honor, I may have the month wrong, but the conversation did happen. I remember it clearly. Judge Briggs' eyes never left him. Of course you do. The mind has an interesting way of manufacturing clarity when convenience requires it. He flinched, a tiny involuntary twitch of irritation. I don't appreciate the implication. You don't have to appreciate it, she interrupted softly. You just have to answer honestly. The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't loud, but it was dense, the kind of silence that reveals character. Mara stood still, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the judge as if every word was a lifeline. Ethan shifted his weight again, pulling at his cufflinks like a magician whose trick had been spoiled mid-performance. The judge took a slow breath. Let's set the documents aside for now, she said, sliding them neatly into a stack. I'd like to hear about what happened after this supposed loan or investment was made. Ethan nodded, relieved to move away from the paperwork minefield. I gave her the money, and for a while things were fine. Then she started making changes, switching suppliers, hiring new staff without consulting me, ignoring my advice. You mean she was running her business? The judge noted dryly. Well, yes, but I was a stakeholder. She was supposed to take my guidance seriously. Was that outlined in any signed agreement? He blinked. Not explicitly, but it was understood. The judge tilted her head. Understood by whom? He hesitated. By both of us, I thought. She nodded slowly. And yet, she doesn't share that understanding. Curious. The faintest trace of sarcasm flickered beneath her composure, and the gallery couldn't help a few quiet smiles. Ethan felt it, the room slipping away from him. His control evaporating, Mara finally spoke, her voice steady. Your Honor, he started showing up at my shop unannounced. He talked to my employees like he owned the place. He even changed prices on the service board one day. When I confronted him, he said it was for marketing strategy. I told him to stop interfering, and the next week I got an email from him saying I owed him money. Ethan threw up his hands. That's an exaggeration. I was trying to help. Judge Briggs raised a single eyebrow. Help, Mr. Caldwell? By rewriting contracts and intimidating staff? He looked around, desperate for support. I didn't intimidate anyone. Did you raise your voice at her? The judge pressed. He hesitated. I might have gotten frustrated. Frustration is natural, she said coolly. But when frustration becomes control, it stops being partnership and starts being manipulation. The room went still again. She turned to Mara. Ms. Torres, do you still have those emails? Mara nodded, handing over printed copies. The judge skimmed through them, and her expression changed just slightly. One of Ethan's messages read, If you don't listen, I'll pull my funding and make sure everyone knows you're unreliable. You'll never get another investor again. Another said, I can always change the paperwork. Don't test me. The judge set the pages down. Slowly, carefully. When she looked up, her tone carried the weight of authority sharpened by disbelief. Mr. Caldwell, this isn't partnership. This is coercion, Ethan's jaw tensed. Those were heat-of-the-moment comments. Heat doesn't make a man threaten someone's livelihood, she said flatly. Intent does, the gallery murmured again, the sound like a wave cresting. Mara closed her eyes briefly, the words landing like vindication. Then, without warning, the judge shifted the tone of the proceeding. Mr. Caldwell, she said evenly, let's test something. You claim this was a loan, that she was supposed to repay you within 12 months, correct? Yes, ma'am. When precisely was the payment due? He blinked. July of this year, she nodded. And when did you file this lawsuit? In May. So you filed before the alleged repayment date? The silence hit him like a physical slap. Well, yes, but she told me she wasn't going to pay, so So you preemptively decided she wouldn't, the judge interrupted. Interesting. You didn't wait for her to default. You assumed it? That's because she made it clear she wouldn't. Do you have proof she said that? He hesitated again. Not written proof, but I remember, Mr. Caldwell, the judge said, leaning forward, her tone quiet but deadly. You seem to remember a lot of convenient things that only you can verify. A ripple of quiet laughter escaped the gallery. Ethan's ears turned red. I'm being mocked here. No, she replied calmly. You're being measured. The tension reached its peak. Judge Briggs gestured toward the clerk. Please mark Exhibit C, the timeline of payments and filing. It speaks for itself. She turned back to Ethan. You didn't file because she failed to pay. You filed because she stopped letting you control her. That's not breach of contract, Mr. Caldwell. That's wounded pride. The words landed like a gavel. He tried to hide the tremor in his hand by adjusting his papers, but the tremor stayed. The mask was slipping completely now. Mara, meanwhile, remained still. But her eyes, and for the first time, had carried strength. It wasn't triumph. It was release. The truth was no longer locked in her throat. When the court recessed for lunch, Ethan walked out quickly, his face a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Reporters in the hallway whispered as he passed, sensing a headline forming around the man who thought he could outsmart justice. He stopped at the restroom sink, splashing water on his face, staring at his reflection. You've got this, he muttered. You always get out of things. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it, because for the first time, the reflection staring back didn't look confident. It looked cornered. Meanwhile, Mara sat quietly in the hallway, sipping from a water bottle, her hands finally still. Her attorney leaned beside her. She's not buying a word he says. I know, Mara said softly. She sees right through him, the attorney smiled. She always does. Inside the judge's chambers, Helen Briggs reviewed her notes over a cup of coffee. She didn't need the caffeine. Her mind was already sharp, cutting through inconsistencies like glass. This wasn't just a case about money. It was about pattern. Control disguised as generosity. Manipulation packaged as mentorship. She'd seen it all before, and if experience had taught her anything, it was this. Liars always slip. Always. When the session resumed, Ethan tried one last performance. He softened his tone, adjusted his language, even added a sprinkle of humility. But it was too late. The judge had already dissected his contradictions. Mr. Caldwell, she said, you strike me as a man used to being in charge. That's fine in business, but this isn't your boardroom. It's my courtroom. And here, the truth dictates control, not ego. Her words were quiet, but they hit with the force of a hammer. He swallowed hard. Understood, Your Honor. I hope so, she replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. Because tomorrow, when we address final arguments, I expect facts, not theater. With that, she stood, signaling the end of the day's proceedings. The bailiff called out, Court adjourned! The sound of the gavel was final, crisp, echoing through the room like a promise. Ethan exhaled, his composure cracking. Mara gathered her papers, her hands steady now, the trembling from the day before completely gone, because the truth once spoken aloud no longer hides. It breathes, it grows. And in Judge Briggs's courtroom, it always finds its way to the light. When the courtroom doors reopened the next morning, the air felt charged, the kind of tension that comes before lightning strikes. Everyone knew that today would decide everything. Mara sat quietly at her table, her documents arranged neatly in front of her. She didn't look triumphant. She looked centered, resolved. Across the aisle, Ethan's expression was different. The swagger was gone. The smile he had worn like armor had cracked, revealing exhaustion beneath. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the night combing through files, searching for some thread to pull, some detail that could twist the narrative back in his favor. But truth isn't paper. You can't edit it. When Judge Helen Briggs entered, the room hushed instantly. Her presence carried authority that didn't need to be announced. Silver hair pulled tight, black robe perfectly pressed, her expression unreadable. She sat, looked down at her docket, then back up. Before we begin, she said, voice calm but cutting, I want to remind both parties that this courtroom is not a stage. It is a place for truth, and today we will get to the heart of it. Ethan swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. Mara nodded silently. The judge began methodically, reviewing the case files, the bank statements, and the email threads already entered into evidence. Then she set them down and folded her hands. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, "yesterday we discussed your claim that Ms. Torres owed you repayment by July. Yet you filed this lawsuit 2 months prior. Tell me again, why?" Ethan straightened, his tone smooth but forced. "Because she told me she had no intention of paying, Your Honor. I didn't want to wait and be left with nothing." Judge Briggs's pen hovered above her pad. "Do you have proof of that claim?" He hesitated. "No, not written. But she said it." "I remember." "Memory," she interrupted softly, "is a fragile witness. Let's deal in evidence, shall we?" The courtroom fell utterly still. She turned toward Mara. "Ms. Torres, did you ever tell him you would not repay the money?" "No, Your Honor. I told him the business was reinvesting profits to stay afloat. He didn't like that I wouldn't follow his pricing model. That's when he turned hostile." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Hostile is a strong word." The judge didn't look up. "Not as strong as deceit," she murmured. Then she turned to the clerk. "Please bring me Exhibit D, the digital forensics report." The bailiff handed over a printed sheet. The audience leaned forward, sensing something major. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, scanning the page, "your emails to Ms. Torres have been authenticated by an independent examiner. Do you recall sending one on March 12th at 11:46 p.m. that reads," she glanced down, "If you won't comply, I'll just alter the paperwork and call it a loan. Simple." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ethan froze, color draining from his face. "That message," she continued evenly, "was sent from your verified business account." He tried to recover. "Your Honor, that was sarcasm." "It wasn't meant literally." She cut him off. "Do you often commit fraud sarcastically, Mr. Caldwell?" The room broke into hushed laughter, quickly silenced by a look from the bailiff. Ethan's hands trembled. I was frustrated." She wasn't listening. It was a joke." Judge Briggs leaned forward. Her tone was low, dangerous. "The law doesn't find jokes in deceitful documents. It finds intent. And what I see here is intent to manipulate." For the first time, the mask was gone. Ethan's charm collapsed under the weight of evidence. He looked small now, his suit suddenly too large, his shoulders hunched. The judge pressed further. "You presented a falsified contract, filed prematurely, and harassed the defendant through veiled threats. You have wasted this court's time under false pretenses." She turned to Mara. "Ms. Torres, did this behavior impact your business?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. "After his interference, I lost 2 clients. He contacted one of them personally, saying my company was unstable. It took months to rebuild." Judge Briggs's jaw tightened. "Did he contact them as a self-proclaimed investor?" Mara nodded. "He did." Ethan started to protest, but the judge raised a hand. "Don't. Every time you speak, you confirm exactly who you are." The gallery barely breathed. Then came the turning point, the kind of moment that defines courtroom legend. Judge Briggs leaned back, eyes half closed as if calculating something invisible. Then she said quietly, "Mr. Caldwell, tell me, what does the word loan mean to you?" Ethan blinked, thrown off. "It's money given with the expectation of repayment." "And investment?" She pressed. He hesitated. "Money given with the expectation of profit." "So," she said slowly, "a loan demands return regardless of outcome, while an investment carries risk, yes?" "Yes." "Then why," she asked, her tone tightening like a snare, "did you call this an investment in your own emails and bank memos, but a loan in your legal filings?" The color in his face deepened, part rage, part panic. "Because it's both. I wanted to protect myself." The judge's pen stopped moving. "So you wanted the benefits of a partner and the safety of a creditor?" He stammered. I just wanted what was fair." She leaned in, voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. "Fair isn't rewriting the truth to fit your comfort, Mr. Caldwell. Fair is standing by the words you spoke when they served both of you, not just when they served you." Mira's eyes welled, not from vindication, but from release. After months of being gaslit, doubted, and pressured, her story had finally been spoken, not by her lips, but by truth itself. Ethan sat down defeated, whispering something inaudible to his attorney. Judge Briggs folded her notes. "I've heard enough." She paused, the courtroom hanging on her next breath. "I will be issuing my ruling now." The sound of the clock on the wall ticked softly, marking each second like a countdown. In this case, she began, we've seen a common tragedy, arrogance cloaked in generosity, a man who believed his intelligence entitled him to control another's livelihood. A man who used paperwork as a weapon and called it business. She turned her gaze to Ethan. You didn't want repayment. You wanted submission. When you didn't get it, you used deceit as retaliation. Ethan's head dropped. Judge Briggs continued, this court finds your claim invalid. There was no enforceable loan. The money was voluntarily invested. And your actions following that investment, tampering with contracts, harassing the defendant's clients, and submitting falsified evidence, constitute malicious interference. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbling furiously, Mara covered her mouth. Emotion spilling silently. Judge Briggs wasn't finished. Accordingly, judgment is entered in favor of Ms. Torres. You are to pay restitution for damages totaling $7,500 plus court costs. Furthermore, this court refers the matter of document alteration to the county prosecutor for review. Ethan's head snapped up. Wait, prosecution? You can't, she met his eyes coldly. I can, and I will. The law doesn't look kindly on falsified contracts. He stood, desperate. I was trying to fix a misunderstanding. Her gavel slammed once, a thunderclap that ended his plea mid-sentence. No, Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice like marble against steel. You were trying to rewrite reality, and in this courtroom, reality writes you back. The silence that followed was heavy, almost holy. Ethan sank back into his seat, face pale. Mara exhaled slowly, the tension she'd carried for months finally leaving her body. Judge Briggs gathered her papers, speaking one last time before standing. This case is concluded. Let this serve as a reminder. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just waits, patient and immovable, and until lies collapse beneath it. The bailiff called, "Court adjourned." The gavel struck once more, sealing the verdict. Ethan remained seated long after the courtroom emptied. His attorney whispered something about appeals, but he barely heard it. His ears rang with her voice. You were trying to rewrite reality. Outside, the reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, but no one asked him for comment. The man who always had something to say suddenly had nothing left. Inside, Mara waited by the courthouse doors. When Judge Briggs exited, she stopped her. Thank you, Your Honor, Mara said softly. The judge gave a faint smile. Don't thank me. Thank the truth. It's the only one that showed up. Then she walked away, robe flowing behind her like shadow and light intertwined. That night, news of the case hit local headlines. Businessman's lies exposed in court. Judge's precision unravels deception. But what the cameras couldn't capture was the real story. Not about law or money, but about the power of honesty spoken against arrogance. Because in Judge Briggs's courtroom, lies don't just lose, they teach. And for Ethan Caldwell, that lesson had just begun. The verdict didn't just echo through the courtroom. It rippled outward through headlines, gossip, and the quiet corners of consequence. But for Ethan Caldwell, it wasn't the gavel that broke him. It was the silence that came after. He used to love silence. The kind that came after a meeting went his way, after people nodded and agreed because they were too intimidated to push back. That silence used to mean power. Now it sounded like loss. He sat alone in his apartment that night, the walls bare except for a single, crooked painting, something abstract he once bragged about buying for more than most people make in a month. The apartment used to feel luxurious. Now it felt hollow, like the echo of a man who had built his identity out of half-truths and charm. On the coffee table sat the court's restitution notice, folded neatly beside his phone. He'd read it twice already, each word a reminder that there were no shortcuts left. No clever spins. No alternate versions of events. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan had to face the one person he'd never outsmarted, himself. Across town, Mara Torres stood outside her small cleaning business, the evening breeze lifting the now hiring sign she'd finally been able to afford to hang again. The glow from the storefront reflected in her eyes, soft but certain. The storm was over, but peace, real peace, didn't come from winning. It came from surviving, her best employee Carla locked up beside her. Can you believe it's done? She asked, smiling. Mara nodded slowly. It doesn't feel real yet. I spent so long being scared that people wouldn't believe me, that he'd twist things again. But she saw it. The judge saw it, Carla grinned. That woman doesn't miss a thing. I'd hate to be on her bad side. Mara laughed for the first time in months. I think she's on the side of truth. And that's enough. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Judge Helen Briggs closed the case file for Caldwell versus Torres. Another day, another ruling, another lesson in human behavior. She'd been on the bench long enough to know that court wasn't just about facts, it was about character. And character, no matter how polished on the outside, always revealed itself under pressure. Her clerk entered quietly. "Long day, Judge?" "Long but necessary," she replied, sipping her tea. "Cases like this remind me why I do this job." The clerk smiled. "You mean catching liars?" Briggs chuckled softly. "No. Teaching them that truth doesn't need a defense." She set the cup down and glanced at the window, the city lights blinking against the night. She'd seen hundreds of Ethans in her career, smart men, entitled men who believed intelligence was a shield against accountability. But every time the result was the same. Lies might win attention, but truth always wins endurance. A few weeks later, Ethan showed up at the courthouse again, this time not to appeal but to pay. The clerk recognized him, though his appearance had changed. The suit was gone, replaced by a plain button-down, no watch. No performance. He handed over the envelope with the restitution check. Hands steady, but eyes tired. "Judge Briggs requested it be documented that you made the payment in full," the clerk said. "Yeah," he murmured. "I figured she would." As he turned to leave, the clerk hesitated. "You know, most people don't come in person. They just mail it." Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. "Yeah, I used to mail things too. Then I realized showing up matters more." He walked out into the sunlight. A man stripped of image, but maybe, for the first time, close to something honest. Later that week, Mara received the restitution letter. She didn't cry or celebrate. She simply placed it in a drawer and whispered, "Done." But the story didn't end with money. It rarely does. That Friday, as she was closing up, a car pulled into the lot. Ethan stepped out. Not the man from court, not the confident speaker, not the manipulator. Just a man holding an envelope. Mara froze. "What are you doing here?" He raised his hands gently. "I'm not here to argue. I just wanted to give you this." He handed over the envelope. Inside was a short letter. "Mara, I don't expect forgiveness. You don't owe me that. I just wanted you to know you were right. I crossed a line because I couldn't handle being wrong. I thought control was the same as success. It's not. You showed me that." "Ethan," she stared at the letter for a long moment. "Why are you really telling me this?" He took a breath. "Because I've spent my whole life pretending I was better than people who told the truth. Turns out they were stronger than I ever was." She said nothing, just nodded once, firmly. Then quietly, "I hope you mean it." "I do," he said. "For the first time, I actually do." He walked away, no expectation of reconciliation, no attempt at justification. Just a man learning to live without lies. Weeks turned to months. Mara's business began to grow again, slow but steady. The story of her court case became a quiet legend in her community, the one where the underdog stood her ground and truth prevailed. And somewhere across the city, Ethan found himself volunteering at a financial literacy center, teaching young entrepreneurs about contracts, integrity, and accountability. It wasn't penance. It was perspective. He'd finally learned the difference. One evening at a charity event for small businesses, fate placed 3 people in the same room once again: Mara, Ethan, and Judge Briggs. Mara was there as a guest of honor, recognized for her perseverance. Ethan was there quietly as a volunteer. The judge attended as the keynote speaker. When their paths crossed near the refreshment table, an awkward silence lingered. Then Judge Briggs spoke first. "Well," she said dryly, "I didn't expect to see my courtroom reunion here." Mara smiled faintly. "I guess life has a sense of humor." Ethan nodded respectfully. "I owe you both a thank you." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "Nearly sentencing you?" He chuckled softly. "For holding a mirror up. I didn't like what I saw, but I needed to." The judge regarded him for a moment. That same piercing stare that once cut through his lies. But this time she saw something else behind his eyes. Humility. "I'll say this much," she said. Most people never learn. Maybe you did, Ethan exhaled. I'm trying. Mara extended a hand. Then keep trying. He hesitated, then shook it. No words, no apologies, just acknowledgement. A fragile but genuine peace. As the event ended, Judge Briggs stood on stage delivering her closing remarks to a room full of small business owners, entrepreneurs, and dreamers. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen both the best and worst of human ambition. Success, she said, isn't measured by what you take from others, but by what truth you're willing to stand on when the ground shakes beneath you. The audience listened in silence. You can build wealth. You can build influence, but if you build it on deception, it won't survive its first challenge. Integrity is the only foundation that doesn't crack. She looked toward Mara and Ethan in the crowd. I've seen liars fall and I've seen the honest rise. And every time truth wins, not because it's loud, but because it never quits. Applause filled the room, long and sincere. Outside, as the night wind swept through the parking lot, Mara paused by her car, looking up at the stars. Ethan walked by, heading the other way, and for a brief moment their paths crossed once more. He nodded respectfully. She smiled. No words were needed. The story had already been told, and somewhere in the distance the echo of Judge Briggs's gavel seemed to linger, not as punishment, but as rhythm. A heartbeat of justice, a reminder that truth, once spoken, never dies. Because in her courtroom, lies don't just get punished. They get transformed into lessons, scars, and second chances. And sometimes that's the real verdict.